There is a moment most people never forget. You're standing in a room filled with people you've known for years, friends, coworkers, maybe even family, and suddenly something feels different. Nobody insults you, nobody argues with you, nobody openly challenges you. Yet the atmosphere has changed. The smiles seem thinner, the conversations feel shorter. The warmth that used to be there now feels strangely distant. You notice it, but you can't explain it. So you start questioning yourself. Did I do something wrong? Did I offend someone? Did I change without realizing it? Most people assume moments like this are misunderstandings. According to Machiavelli, they often are not. Because beneath every social interaction lies an invisible struggle that few people ever recognize. A struggle for status, for influence, for psychological control. And the moment you begin changing, growing, or seeing the world differently, that invisible balance begins to shift. What makes this unsettling is that nobody has to consciously decide to turn against you. Human nature does most of the work on its own. People rarely react to who you are. They react to what your presence means, to what it reveals, to what it threatens. And that raises a dangerous question. Why does awareness make certain people uncomfortable? Why does personal growth sometimes turn you into a target? And why does becoming more authentic, independent, and difficult to control often cause others to quietly pull away? To understand that, we must examine one of the oldest truths Machiavelli ever understood about human nature. People are not disturbed by your weakness. They are disturbed by your transformation. The hidden architecture of human discomfort. Most people grow up believing that social conflict is simple. Someone lies, someone betrays, someone says something offensive, someone breaks trust. The cause is visible. The reason is obvious. But Machiavelli understood something far more unsettling about human nature. Many of the strongest negative reactions people have toward you are not caused by what you did. They are caused by what your existence forces them to feel. To understand why, we must first understand a truth that has shaped human behavior for centuries. Every person lives with two identities. The first is the person they present to the world. Confident, reasonable, successful, generous, loyal. This is the public mask, the carefully constructed image people use to gain acceptance, maintain status, and protect their position within a group. Most people spend years building this image, and even more years defending it. But beneath that image lives another version of the self, a version rarely shown to anyone. The hidden ambitions, the jealousy, the resentment, the hunger for recognition, the fear of being insignificant, the quiet insecurity that whispers they are not as respected, admired, or successful as they want others to believe. Machiavelli understood that human beings are masters of concealment, not only from others, but from themselves. Yet what is buried does not disappear. The desire for power remains, the envy remains, the fear remains. It simply retreats into the shadows of the mind. And when someone enters their life and unintentionally exposes those hidden fears, something immediate happens. The psychological defenses activate. Discomfort appears, then resistance, then hostility. Because people rarely attack what threatens their comfort. They attack what threatens the story they tell themselves about who they are. Why awareness turns you into a threat. Here is one of the most uncomfortable truths Machiavelli understood about human nature. Most people are not threatened by power. They are threatened by perception. Because power can often be negotiated, but perception cannot. The moment someone sees through the game begins to lose its power. This is why highly perceptive people often make others uneasy without ever trying to. Not because they expose anyone, not because they criticize anyone, not because they openly challenge anyone, but because their presence introduces a dangerous possibility. The possibility that they see what others are trying to hide. Think about it. Imagine spending years carefully constructing an image. You project confidence while privately doubting yourself. You project generosity while secretly keeping score. You project strength while fearing rejection. Over time, that image becomes a form of protection, a shield, a source of influence, a source of social security. Then someone enters the room who doesn't seem impressed by appearances. Someone who pays more attention to behavior than words. Someone who notices patterns, contradictions, motives. Suddenly the shield no longer feels secure, and that is where discomfort begins. Machiavelli observed that people rarely confront uncomfortable truths directly. Instead, they redirect their discomfort toward the person who revealed it. Rather than asking, "Why does this person make me uneasy?" the mind chooses an easier explanation. There is something wrong with them. And almost immediately new labels appear. They're arrogant, they're cold, they're strange, they're judgmental. They think they're better than everyone else. But notice something important. None of those accusations necessarily describe reality. They describe a reaction to the pressure your awareness creates. Because what people fear is not your opinion. It is your ability to see beyond the performance. And once that fear takes hold, something changes. People stop responding to who you actually are. They begin responding to what your presence represents. A threat to illusion, a threat to control, a threat to the carefully managed image they depend on for status and security. In other words, they are not reacting to you. They are reacting to the feelings you awaken inside them. And human nature has always preferred blaming the mirror over confronting the reflection. The 7 ways you quietly trigger resentment. Let's make this practical, because these dynamics rarely announce themselves openly. Nobody walks up and says, "Your growth makes me uncomfortable." Nobody admits, "Your independence threatens my influence." Human nature is rarely that honest. Instead, these reactions appear in subtle patterns that slowly repeat themselves until they become impossible to ignore. First, you reflect what they've been avoiding. Machiavelli understood a truth few people are willing to admit. Most individuals are not competing for happiness. They are competing for position, for status, for significance, for the feeling that they are moving forward in life. This is why your improvement can become surprisingly threatening. You get healthier, more disciplined, more focused, more emotionally controlled. You never criticize anyone. You never tell people how they should live. Yet resistance appears anyway. Why? Because every improvement shifts the comparison. Your discipline silently challenges the stories others tell themselves, the stories that protect their current position, the stories that excuse their inaction, the stories that justify why they have remained where they are. Machiavelli observed that people defend their self-image as fiercely as they defend their property. And when your actions begin weakening that image, many will not attack the weakness within themselves. They will attack the person exposing it. Not because you harm them, but because your existence disrupts the narrative that keeps them comfortable. In the game of human nature, comfort is often valued more highly than truth. Second, you represent what they gave up. Machiavelli understood a brutal truth about human nature. People rarely resent those who have less than they do. Resentment almost always moves upward, toward the person who represents something they once wanted for themselves. The friend who finally started the business, the colleague who finished the degree, the person who walked away from the life everyone else kept tolerating. These people aren't attacking anyone. They're simply moving forward. But their existence creates a problem, because every success asks an uncomfortable question. If they did it, why didn't I? Most people don't want to answer that question, not honestly. So they look for another explanation. You're lucky, you're arrogant, you've changed. You think you're better than everyone else. Notice what's happening. They're not reacting to your achievement. They're reacting to what your achievement represents. A road they never took, a risk they never accepted, a version of themselves they abandoned years ago. And nothing makes people more uncomfortable than a living reminder of their own surrender. Third, you no longer need their approval. This is where power dynamics begin to change. Many relationships are built on invisible exchanges: validation, attention, emotional dependence, influence. For years, you may have explained yourself, sought permission, adjusted your behavior to avoid disappointing others. Without realizing it, you handed people leverage. Then something changes. You become more secure, more self-directed, more certain of who you are. You stop chasing approval. You stop over-explaining every decision. You stop asking for permission to live your own life. From your perspective, this is growth. From their perspective, something far more significant has happened. They have lost influence. The emotional buttons that once worked no longer produce the same response. The guilt no longer works. The pressure no longer works. The manipulation no longer works. And because few people consciously understand this shift, they create a different explanation. You've changed. You think you're better than everyone. You've become distant. But what they are often describing is not arrogance, it is independence. And independence has always been difficult for those who benefited from your dependence. Third, you no longer need their approval. This one is more dangerous than most people realize, because approval is a form of power. And Machiavelli understood that power is rarely surrendered willingly. For years, you may have explained yourself, sought validation, adjusted your decisions to keep other people comfortable. Without realizing it, you gave them influence. Then something changes. You become more confident, more independent, more certain of your direction. You stop asking for permission. You stop defending every choice. You stop needing everyone to agree with you. And suddenly the balance shifts. The emotional leverage they once had begins to disappear. The guilt stops working. The pressure stops working. The criticism loses its effect. From your perspective, this is freedom. From their perspective, it feels like a loss of control. Few people will ever admit that. Instead, they create a different story. You've changed. You're becoming arrogant. You think you're better than everyone. But listen carefully. What they often call arrogance is simply independence. Because the moment you stop needing approval, you become harder to influence. And people who benefited from that influence rarely celebrate its loss. Fourth, they can no longer predict you. Machiavelli understood that influence depends on predictability. The easier you are to predict, the easier you are to control. Most social relationships operate on invisible patterns. Criticize someone. They work harder for approval. Make them feel guilty. They apologize. Offer praise. They become more compliant. Over time, people learn which buttons produce which reactions. And whether they realize it or not, they begin relying on those reactions. Then something changes. You stop playing the role they assign to you. The criticism no longer affects you. The guilt no longer controls you. The praise no longer buys your loyalty. Suddenly the script stops working, and that is where discomfort begins. Because the moment someone can no longer predict your response, they lose a degree of influence over you. They realize the old methods no longer work. The old leverage is gone. The old game has been seen. Machiavelli knew that people are most comfortable when they understand the rules of the game. But when those rules suddenly change, uncertainty replaces control. And few things make people more uneasy than realizing they can no longer predict the person standing in front of them. Fifth, you refuse to maintain collective illusions. Machiavelli understood that groups are often held together by unspoken agreements. Not all of them are true, but they are useful. Every group has certain things nobody questions, certain truths nobody mentions, certain contradictions everyone pretends not to see. Because stability is often valued more than honesty. Then someone breaks the pattern. They don't laugh at what isn't funny. They don't agree with what they don't believe. They say what everyone else is avoiding. And suddenly the atmosphere changes. Not because they attack the group, but because they expose something the group was quietly protecting. Machiavelli observed that people will often defend an illusion more fiercely than a truth. Why? Because the illusion preserves order. It preserves comfort. It preserves the existing balance of power. The moment you challenge that illusion, even unintentionally, resistance appears. The group closes ranks, not to punish you, but to protect itself. Because once the unspoken lie is exposed, everyone is forced to confront what they were pretending not to see. And few things are more threatening to a group than a person willing to say what everyone else is thinking. Sixth, you begin saying no. Machiavelli understood that access is a form of power. Access to your time, your attention, your energy. For a long time, you may have been the easy person, always available, always helpful, always willing to accommodate everyone else's needs. People become accustomed to that. They begin treating your availability as something guaranteed. Then one day you change, you set boundaries, you protect your time, you refuse requests that no longer serve your priorities. You begin saying one simple word, no. And suddenly people who were comfortable with the old version of you become uncomfortable with the new one. Not because your boundaries are unfair, but because those boundaries limit their access. Machiavelli observed that people rarely complain when they benefit from a situation. They complain when the benefit disappears. So new labels appear. You're selfish, you're cold, you're difficult, you've changed. But look closely. What they call selfishness is often self-respect. What they call coldness is often a boundary. And what they truly resent is not your refusal. They resent the loss of a privilege they once assumed would always be theirs. Because human nature becomes attached to access. And when access is removed, many people experience it as a personal loss of power. Seventh, you keep advancing while they remain still. This is the most dangerous form of resentment because it is created by comparison. As you grow, your standards change, your thinking changes, your ambitions change, and slowly the distance between you and others begins to grow. Machiavelli understood that people can tolerate your struggle. What they struggle to tolerate is your ascent, because your progress forces an uncomfortable question. If they're moving forward, why am I standing still? Few people want to answer that honestly, so they choose an easier path. They criticize your ambition. They call your growth arrogance. They treat your success as betrayal. But they are not reacting to your progress. They are reacting to the comparison your progress creates. And nothing threatens the ego more than watching someone become what you once intended to be. What is really happening? Look closely at all 7 reasons. The pattern is the same. People are not reacting to what you do. They are reacting to what your presence represents. Your discipline exposes excuses. Your ambition exposes surrender. Your independence removes influence. Your boundaries remove access. Your growth changes the hierarchy, and that creates pressure. Machiavelli understood that the most difficult person to control is the person who no longer depends on external validation. The person who thinks for themselves, acts for themselves, and refuses to live according to someone else's expectations. Such people become unpredictable, difficult to manipulate, difficult to pressure, difficult to place inside a role. And that is where the real threat begins. Not because they seek power over others, but because others can no longer exercise power over them. This is why your transformation often creates resistance. You are no longer playing the part people assign to you. And whenever someone steps outside the role society expects them to play, those invested in the old role rarely celebrate. They feel threatened. Because every independent person is a reminder that dependence is a choice. And few truths are more unsettling than that. What should you do? The first mistake is to shrink yourself. Many people notice resistance and immediately retreat. They speak less, aim lower, hide their ambition, return to the version of themselves that made everyone comfortable. Machiavelli would consider this a mistake, because sacrificing your growth does not eliminate resentment. It only rewards it. Never become smaller to fit inside someone else's expectations. Second, accept that some relationships have expiration dates. Not every relationship is built to survive your evolution. Some people were connected to who you were, not who you are becoming. That is not failure. It is reality. Third, learn to distinguish wisdom from resentment. Some criticism contains valuable information. Listen to it. But not every negative reaction deserves your attention. Machiavelli understood that many attacks reveal more about the attacker than the target. Learn to recognize the difference. Most importantly, pay attention to who moves closer as you grow. Human nature responds to strength in 2 ways. Some feel threatened, others feel inspired. Some resent progress, others respect it. Keep the second group close. They are rare. Finally, remember this. The greatest danger is not becoming blind to others. It is becoming blind to yourself. Ambition can create arrogance. Success can create pride. Power can create illusion. Machiavelli repeatedly warned that self-deception destroys more people than enemies ever could. Study others, but study yourself even more carefully. Because the man who understands others is intelligent. The man who understands himself is difficult to defeat. As you continue to grow, some people will leave. Some relationships will end. Some connections will quietly fade away. Do not be surprised. Machiavelli understood that every transformation changes the balance of relationships. Not everyone benefits from your growth. Not everyone welcomes your independence. And not everyone is willing to confront what your progress reveals. But that does not mean you should stop. The goal was never to make everyone like you. The goal was never to avoid criticism. The goal was to become stronger, more aware, more self-directed, more difficult to manipulate. Most of what feels like personal rejection is not personal at all. People are rarely reacting to who you are. They are reacting to what your presence forces them to see. Their excuses, their fears, their compromises, their unrealized ambitions. They do not always resent you. They resent the discomfort your existence creates. The uncomfortable comparison, the uncomfortable truth, the uncomfortable possibility that they could be more than they currently are. And that is why you must never fear becoming the mirror, because the mirror is not responsible for what it reflects. It simply reveals what is already there. And Machiavelli understood a timeless truth. The moment you stop living for approval, stop apologizing for your growth, and stop shrinking yourself to protect the comfort of others, you become a person who is far more difficult to control. And few things unsettle human nature more than a person who can no longer be controlled.